got to get to this story first. We've been covering it on the program for a little while, and it's Ken Paxton's impeachment trial. Over the weekend, Ken Paxton, who had around 20 charges filed against him by the House, the Senate only heard 16 of them. And over the weekend, Ken Paxton was acquitted on all 16 counts that were brought before the Senate. Remember, for people who weren't paying attention, most of these charges were about his relationship with real estate investor Nate Paul, somebody who himself is in a lot of trouble with the FBI, as is Ken Paxton, who, even though he's acquitted from these things from his impeachment, also does have this federal trial, criminal trial for securities fraud, which should have its first hearings coming up in October. But after weeks of trial, the Senate voted to acquit Paxton on 16 charges, and only two Republicans broke ranks with the rest of the GOP and voted to indict Paxton on some of these charges. And we're just going to go over really briefly what happened. Sort of simple. You don't really have to follow these things too closely. You get it. It's politics. It's politics. It's politics. It's politics, right? You can get really in the weeds and talk about legal strategy and all this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, the senators in the Republican Party decided it's not worth their time to touch this and the threat that it might mean to their seats. Now, there were issues with the prosecution. It certainly didn't seem like the prosecutors were delivering, and the House members who were leading some of these prosecutions certainly were really unorganized at times. And there was a lot of focus, and this is something I talked about on this program and on Griscom streams as this was going on. There was a lot of focus on Ken Paxton's affair and the potential benefits from Nate Paul. Remember, Matt and I were talking about it. Busby, who is one of the lawyers defending Paxton, made a big deal about how oh, these people were talking about how Paxton got all this money to renovate his kitchen, but actually his kitchen's really ugly. Um, you know, they wanted to make it about that kind of thing instead of what it should have been about, in my opinion, which is understand this is a political trial, understanding that you need to make a political argument, not just to those senators who are already getting calls and pressure from all these different folks, but to the general public about what these crimes really were about. Fundamentally, what these crimes really were about was somebody named Ken Paxton, who has been elected to be the Attorney General of the state of Texas, who has responsibilities to the people of Texas to pursue our interests. That means defending public institutions. That means going after corporate and bad actors in the state of Texas who are harming people. And Ken Paxton wasn't doing that. And why was he not doing that? He wasn't doing that because he was trying to help out his buddy Nate and he was running around having an affair. You make the point here that, you want to focus on the infidelity and all that kind of stuff, maybe to start making your point, fine. But the fundamental crime here is the political crime here is that somebody was elected to do a job and they refused to do it to benefit wealthy people and benefit themselves. That's it. Um,
So you're saying they did a sort of if the granite countertop is shit, you must acquit
yeah,
sort of.
that was basically what what the trial was. Um, and again, I don't know if that even would have mattered at this point, because this case was just so clearly political. The question that these GOP senators were asking themselves was this going to help me or hurt me? And that's why there was a lot of money spent by outside groups to start to put pressure on these senators. In fact, some of these outside groups were paying TikTok people and young people on Twitter to tweet out like pro Paxton. If you came across this trial at all on social media, you were probably getting fed because of the new Twitter algorithm. Some of these right wing things about how unfair it is that, the wonderful Ken Paxton is being attacked by a bunch of Democrats, right? They spent a lot of
We gotta
money
how to
on
figure
the PR
we gotta
camp.
figure out how to get our people that money.
Yeah, that would be good.
Like, I think, like, yeah, I'd be curious how that works.
But of course it's political. And also talking about the trial, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick absolutely interfered with the trial. In fact, he got $3 million from pro Paxton groups before the trial even started. And he made incredibly, just clearly biased decisions in Paxton's favor and against the prosecution. Most importantly, not having Ken Paxton be compelled to testify in his own impeachment, not having the mistress, one of the people who's at the center of this trial, be compelled to testify, and not having Nate Paul, again, one of the major figures in this, being compelled to testify. So now you have all the major witnesses not present. It was hard to, have a trial, and Patrick came up with this bizarre legal argument, no, he was making a decision to make sure that Ken Paxton was safe, to make sure that there wasn't going to be any embarrassing footage for Ken Paxton, either of Ken Paxton or his mistress, or from Nate Paul. But what this really represents, and I think one thing that sort of has been undersaid about this trial, because people are upset. A lot of people sort of figured it wouldn't go anywhere. But the fact that it was so overwhelmingly a vote to acquit, right? That's no, like, only two Republicans broke. There was a message that was made loud and clear to Texans, and to Texans who might work for government or even major organizations within the state. Which is that if you are a whistleblower, you better keep your mouth shut. Because remember, one of the major catalysts of this entire investigation coming from the House was the fact that four whistleblowers from Ken Paxton's Attorney General's office, people who are lifelong conservatives, right? Not squishy liberals, not people on the fence, people who believe in the conservative principles of government, right? Who want to do harm to people, do all these kind of things, thought that Ken Paxton was failing in his jobs and blew the whistle. And with the message that is coming out from the GOP senators is an attack on whistleblowers in Texas. We do not care about what crimes you see, what attacks happen to the people of Texas and our tax money. If you blow the whistle, the Texas Senate, and the Texas executive branch, too, frankly, got the backs of the big guys, not you. That's chilling. That's extremely chilling when you're remembering all the other things that are happening in this state right now. There was a war on whistleblowers in the state of Texas and nationally, obviously, as Joe Biden and so many people are willing to try to torture Julian Assange for exposing American war crimes. Now, we got to look at some stuff and talk about a little bit of the fallout, because there's going to be consequences for this, both in the sense of, Ken Paxton staying in office, what this represents for the state of Texas, what this means politically. Let's start here with the Mr. Donald Trump, who, if you weren't following the trial, if you weren't keeping up with this kind of thing, remember that most of the trial was sort of trying to cozy Ken Paxton up to Donald Trump. This is another witch hunt coming up against a good MAGA conservative for fighting against the deep state or whatever. And they people like Steve Bannon, people like Charlie Kirk, all these folks were trying to paint this narrative, and Donald Trump participated very much. And there's so many great truth posts from Donald Trump. We just had to pick one because I always love how he puts himself at the center of things, even when he's very, loosely involved with it.
Oh,
Donald Trump
wow, this
says,
is funny.
yeah. Donald Trump says, yes, it is true that my intervention through Truth Social saved Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton from going down at the hands of Democrats and some Republicans, headed by Paul Ryan, Karl Rove, and others, almost all of whom came back to reason when confronted with the facts. Ken has been a great attorney general, and now he can go back to work for the wonderful people of Texas. It was my honor to have helped correct this injustice.
We must point out that the only thing capitalized and, the Trump style guide on what gets capitalized is always sort of a fascinating thing to try to guess at, but
Mhm.
the one thing capitalized in there was Truth Social, so
Yeah,
he's
and
really,
Paul
like
Ryan.
right, Paul Rhino, that's right, which is, like people don't remember Paul Ryan, I don't think.
I know. I know.
Like
I love that Trump has like these like old school beefs he's still trying to write people up about. Um, no, but it's, I mean, it's certainly true. I mean, Trump's support of Paxton helped him out tremendously here. Um, and these figures, Trump has also called for Dade Phelan, who's the Speaker of the House, to resign. There's been a big push. If people remember, we played some of this ridiculous documentary that was put out by some of these far right groups in the state of Texas, saying that the Texas House, which, by the way, I don't think I need to tell anybody this, but if you're not paying attention, you don't know, is run by the Republican Party. Some of the most conservative people in the country, people who are regularly praised by conservative organizations in this country for just how far right and conservative they are. This kind of false narrative that the Texas Ledge and the Texas House in particular is run by the Democratic Party, starting with Dade Phelan, again, who is an extreme Republican. These are the people who, as you talk about on the show, all of these things we talked about that came out of the legislature this year, incredibly dangerous and anti-human, anti-working class bills, all go through the House. Right? Remember, they're trying to erode democracy for cities and localities in this state to be able to do minimal things for working people, like mandate water breaks for people in the state that regularly has temperatures over 100 degrees, right? Those are the people that Trump and all these folks are saying are now rhinos and liberals and all this kind of stuff. It's just insane. But what does this like really represent? Like here, anyways, we could go through like the titillating stuff, but like let's be smart for a second, understand what's happening. What's happening right now in politics in the state of Texas is there's a war between the House and the Senate. Remember, if you were paying attention to the Texas legislature, the fight over property taxes, property tax cuts in the state almost blew up the entire government because the Senate wanted one version of the bill and the House wanted another. Right? They both wanted to make sure that rich people were getting taken care of. They both wanted to use the incredible windfall that the state of Texas had, not to help out everyday people, but to protect property owners. There was just a fight about what class of property owners, what class of rich people got most of the benefit. There is a fight and a war that has been happening between the House and the Senate. It's not about conservatives versus liberals or moderates versus far right wingers. It's different sections of the capitalist class in Texas wanting to be heard first, wanting to get benefits. And these two groups have different people behind them. Andrew Murr and Dade Phelan have been very clear that they back their position. They haven't backed down after the acquittal. Um, and now it's going to be about money. There's going to be well-funded conservative groups that are going to attack people like Phelan, attack people like Murr, attack members of the House. Um, and people who voted to indict Paxton. A civil war is coming, and it's already. I mean, it's coming. It's already here in the Texas GOP. I don't know how deep it is and what that is going to mean for the primaries that will be coming up for House members. Remember, most people aren't paying attention to this at all. I'm sure, like nationally, people maybe saw it when it came up. Some people in the state of Texas, but this was not a dinner table conversation for most people. It might be a hard sell to say to somebody in Dade Phelan's district, right? He's the Speaker of the House. He can get a lot of things done for you that you want some other kind of MAGA guy instead of him. I don't know how successful it's going to be, but there's certainly going to be well funded primary challenges against members of this House. Um, Paxton certainly has come out and condemned this. He's going to be on Tucker Carlson tomorrow, complaining about it. Dan Patrick, the little governor, who again put his thumb on the scale in favor of Paxton when he was supposed to be presiding over the trial, came out with the fiery speech after Paxton was acquitted. Named some members of the House that he's probably going to try to tap for a leadership election against Dade Phelan. Um, and notably, Patrick has ordered the state to investigate and do a full audit of the money that was spent by the House in its investigation of Ken Paxton. Right? Very little to say and very little worry for the literal millions of dollars that Ken Paxton has been wasting, both in just helping out Nate Paul and also having to pay off people for his constant legal dramas and exposure that he has. That's not a big worry to the state of Texas. They're going to try to get ammo to come at them later. And again, Paxton is going to have his criminal case coming up. There will be a hearing in Houston in October on that. We'll get a sense of schedule. That's probably going to be something that's going to take a little while. But I wanted to play this clip here because it's notable. This is Busby, who is one of the main lawyers defending Ken Paxton. And this is how he framed this fight in his closing arguments.
Let it be known, let it be clear now. The Bush era in Texas ends today. We thought it had ended in the primary when Ken Paxton beat George P. Bush 68 to 32. Well, we thought it was over. It wasn't. Well, now we have an impeachment. It ends today. They can go back to Maine. This is Texas.
Man.
By the way, for people who are curious, Busby, I think, certainly has political aspirations after this and is very likely to be running for the Houston City Council. So, our friends in Houston, keep your eye out for Busby's run here. I don't know how well it will do there. I mean, the Bush family, as much as Trump has, attacked them, and as much as the GOP, in my opinion, is Trump's party at this point, there is no Texas GOP without the Bush family, right? They fundamentally changed politics in the state with the help of people like Karl Rove. People forget that Texas was a strong Democratic state for the vast majority of its history in the 20th century. And it was the Bush family and its allies who worked so hard to create this current dystopia that we have. So it's always interesting to see these kind of shifting alliances. And there's still a lot of people who are still very loyal to that family. But this is how things are being set up right now. Very clear break happening within the Texas GOP.
It could be
Um,
the actual death of that Bush,
well,
family
yeah.
on that, right?
I
Yeah.
mean, I think politically they're toxic, at least in primary elections in the state of Texas, and it's very clear that
Wild. For what on the right? Like, why are they upset with
because they
him?
didn't support Donald Trump, and everyone has to rally around Donald Trump. No, I mean, really, everyone has to rally around Donald Trump. And what name do you associate with a Republican challenger to Donald Trump? It's the Bush family, Jeb, right?
That's so
And then, of
funny.
course, W not supporting him in the presidential elections and all that. I mean, Trump has made a big deal about this, and people are saying that we're not going to be loyal to the people who opened up all these opportunities for the Republican Party in the state of Texas. We're going to be loyal to Donald. It's going to be interesting because, as I noted, there's this war between the House and Senate that has been ongoing. This was before the Paxton trial started. We talk about this all the time during the legislative cycle in the state of Texas, that there's a war between the House and the Senate. What is going to be really interesting is our governor, Greg Abbott, is now pushing for a special session on school vouchers, a war on public education, and a boon to vultures and people who want access to your money. And they're going to need that to go through the House. Now, if people don't know this about Texas, um, school vouchers have always been incredibly contentious within the Republican Party here because most people understand what it is. It's pulling money out of public education, public high schools, middle schools, which not only provide like a big level of sociability. Friday Night Lights. It sometimes sounds funny, but these are important things, especially for people in rural Texas. But more
Civic center.
importantly than that, these provide tremendous amounts of jobs and employment for people in rural Texas where they don't have a lot of other opportunities, right? There's a job you can get at your school district. The worry is that most people in rural Texas will not have access to these nice charter schools or things like that that the rich in San Antonio and in Houston will be able to attend if the school voucher is able to pass. So you add into that mix this already contentious bill and topic with the fact that now Dade Phelan doesn't want to talk to Dan Patrick. The Senate hates the House, and the House feels very betrayed by the Senate. We'll have to see, how successful Greg Abbott's going to be with this push. Fingers crossed, this kind of drama protects public education at least for another cycle in the state of Texas. Um, Greg Abbott says he will take it to special session. He will call another one if it fails. And then he said that there's the easy way and the hard way. The easy way is for them to all acquiesce to his demands to privatize and brutalize our education system in the state of Texas. The hard way is that he will support primary candidates against holdouts. So there's going to be a big civil war in the Republican Party in Texas. It's going to be very entertaining and interesting to watch. The tragedy is that while they are in disarray like this, there is no real political alternative coming from the Democratic Party still. And that's the last thing I want to get to before we jump over to Matt McManus. Is that this is just the latest example that in Texas government, the Texas government doesn't work for you. The Texas government works in the interest of itself and the wealthy. In this case, Ken Paxton has been used our public institutions to benefit himself and his friend Nate Paul while neglecting his duties to the people of Texas and the Texas Constitution. The Senate says that's not a problem. Not a problem at all. In fact, how dare anybody blow the whistle? How dare anybody investigate this guy who's wasting millions of dollars, not protecting the state, wasting money on lawsuits to defend himself and his criminality? Not a problem. Says the Texas Senate. Or to somebody like Greg Abbott, with no real opposition in the Texas GOP, no one strong enough to take him on, and certainly no one strong enough in the Democratic Party to take him on. Abbott has been ripping up the Texas Constitution when it came to COVID policy and to the border policy. Abbott is now turning our border into a war zone, terrorizing migrants and leading to the deaths of Texas National Guardsmen who are on the border as part of Operation Lone Star. All while an entire class of major Greg Abbott donors and GOP donors enrich themselves, fatten themselves up on our money on these dubious contracts, again, to brutalize people at the border. Clearly against the constitutional rules about the amount of power that a governor should have in this state. Clearly against the national constitution's rule about the ability of a governor to be able to operate border policy. No accountability there, no threat there. Do whatever you want, not a problem. Or lastly, to the police. in this state who stood by for an hour and 14 minutes, chatting on their phones, joking around as a lone gunman murdered 19 children and two teachers. No accountability to them, no accountability for the politicians responsible. In fact, anger and indignation from those people that anyone in this state says that's not acceptable to us. There should be accountability for this kind of thing. All this talk about limited government, all this talk about the economic success of Texas, what is defining our era in Texas politics right now is that there is no accountability for the government. It works for the rich, the powerful, and the people in office, and it works to protect them.